Parsha Pairings with Jeff and Sherry. I'm Jeff Friedlander.
And I'm Sherry, and we're so glad you're here with us today. If you are enjoying these videos, we encourage you to like and share with other people. You can also know exactly when we have videos coming up if you go to our YouTube channel and subscribe, and then click the little bell, and
Ding.
It will notify you every time we upload a new video. You can also find our videos by downloading our B1 Ministries app, and that'll give you access to the Parshas as well as other things that we do in the ministry.
This week's Parsha is called Nasso, meaning to lift up. Comes from Numbers chapter 4, verse 21 through chapter 7, verse 89. The Haftorah is Judges chapter 13, verse 2 through 25, and that's Samson's birth. And then Brit Hadashah, our New Testament readings, are Luke chapter 1 through verse 11 through 20, and Acts chapter 21, verses 17 through 26. In this video, we're going to detail chapter 6, particularly the Nazarite Vow, and then we're going to talk about chapter 7, kind of the wrap-up. In a separate video, we'll be talking about the Aaronic benediction by itself, as it's a whole separate topic. We begin this chapter with what's called the Nazarite Vow. It says, and Adonai spoke to Moshe, starting in verse 2, "Speak to Bnei Yisrael and say to any of them, any man or woman who desires to vow a Nazarite vow to be separate from Adonai."
For Adonai, right. And some things you want to note about this, which you emphasized. First of all, men and women could take this vow.
Yeah.
Women were not excluded, which is interesting that God included women in this. He made a special note that they can do this. And we're going to look at a couple of places where we see that in a little bit. Also, this is to Bnei Yisrael. And one thing we should be seeing in the pattern of Numbers is that God speaks to Bnei Yisrael and he speaks to the Levites. This is not a vow that the Levites are to take.
Yeah.
This is a vow that's available to Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel.
And so he says here, in starting in part of verse 2, when either a man or woman makes a special vow, the vow of the Nazarite or Nazarite, to separate himself to the Lord, is to abstain from wine and any other fermented drink. He is not to drink any vinegar made from wine or any other fermented drink, or any grape juice, or eat grapes or raisins. All during his days as a Nazarite, he is not to eat anything from a grapevine, even the seeds or skins. All the duration of his vow, no razor is to come to his head until the time of the consecration to Adonai is over. He is to be holy, and the hair of his head is to grow long. All the days of his separation to Adonai, he is not to go near a dead body. Even if his father, mother, brother, or sister should die, he is not to make himself unclean, because his consecration to God is on his head. All the days of his separation, he is to be consecrated to Adonai. So, we got some things to consider here on this. First of all, let's go through kind of what it is, and then we'll talk about why it is, how it's done. Nazir is the Hebrew word for separated or consecrated. So that's where this Nazarite vow, the Nazir, is the separation.
You're pulling yourself out and making a voluntary vow to separate yourself.
That's right.
Now, I do think it's important to note, because some people may be going, "Oh, wasn't Yeshua from Nazareth?
Yeah.
Does that mean he took the Nazarite vow?" And they're two different things.
Two totally different things.
It's not Nazareth. The town is not because
related.
of the Nazarite vow.
It's not related at all. Okay, so the Nazarite vow as a choice is given, and then there's three things that are in particular they must do. One, they must abstain from wine or strong drink. Now, in Hebrew, there's a couple different words here for this. The word for strong drink, it comes from a root that means to become drunk, essentially. Right. So it's basically saying don't be drunk during this vow, which kind of makes sense. You're not supposed to be drunk anytime. The word is the idea of a drink that could quickly make you drunk, i.e. a very strong fermented drink. We see examples of this in Numbers 28, Isaiah 5. This word is shakar, in case you're wondering what the Hebrew word is, called shakar. And it's used in parallel with another Hebrew word, yayin, which refers to an yayin is a beverage in general, just an intoxicating, where shakar is the more restricted one. Okay, and both of these were forbidden for all priests and the Nazarites when they took the vow.
Yeah.
So the priests couldn't drink these, and the Nazarites couldn't during their vow time.
I think it's interesting to note as well that he is not to eat anything from the grapevine.
Yeah.
The raisin, the grape, the seeds, the skin, anything.
Yeah.
It's not just when it's in wine form.
Yeah.
It's even what could become wine and could become something that could cause drunkenness. And I think that's a great spiritual principle for us as we set ourselves apart to God and we take on, maybe not a Nazarite vow, but vows to God to be separated unto him. And we say, oh, I'm not going to do this. Well, then we ought to look at what is the sourcing of that thing.
Yeah.
And let's not even touch that.
And with this, just for the record, the Bible has a pretty strong presence on alcohol. And a lot of people wonder, is it okay? Is it not okay? In fact, it's very interesting. It used to be very much thought of if you were a quote-unquote believer, follower, or Christian, you didn't drink, period, ever.
That was my tradition.
And eventually that gave way in many cases to where wine or beer has become fairly accepted in many Christian circles. And yet strong drink, bourbon, vodka, harder liquors still tend to have a little bit of a nuance to them, stigma to them. In these scriptures, what we're talking about priests and those who take a Nazarite vow, wine is usually there's many passages that speak of wine. Have a little wine here, a little wine here. It's a joyful drink to have a little bit. But the bulk of scriptures, even about wine, carry with them a negative connotation, like Proverbs calls wine a mocker. There's many places where the drinking leads to too much drinking. So if I were going to counsel a person, I would say, biblically, having alcohol is perfectly legitimate biblically. It's not a sin to drink. It's not a sin to have a drink of alcohol. But if you're going to make an error in this judgment, err to the side of caution and err away from alcohol, because there's more scriptures about the negativity that it provides than the positivity. It is not a sin to drink in our view, but it does carry with it a temptation to be in trouble.
Well, the sin crosses when you get into drunkenness.
Yeah.
The drunkenness is a sin.
Yeah.
And because it does make you incoherent, you're not able to think in your own thoughts anymore. You've opened yourselves up to a realm that is not of a mindset of God. And it causes you to do foolish things many times.
Yeah, and interestingly, in this passage, we're talking about a Nazarite, we're talking about the priest, we're talking about them taking a vow. Why would God want them not to have a drink? Why not even have a glass of wine or something? If it's not a sin, why does that matter? And you see, this is an elevated state of a person who is trying to connect at the highest level with God. They are separating from anything that could possibly detour or confuse them from who God is. And alcohol clogs the brain. It brings the brain into a place of grayness. It brings the brain into a place where things are not clear. People say, oh, I'm the real me. You get the real me if I'm drinking because I don't have any filters. No, that's just real sin. That's not the real you.
We want your filters.
We want the filter. We want the Bible's not about just removing all your filters and taking all the brakes away so the carnality of your depth of flesh can be seen. No, the Bible is saying, I want you to connect with God at the deepest level, and you can't do that if you're allowing your flesh to rise up to the deepest level. See, when we drink to excess, our flesh becomes our master.
Right.
And God is saying, if you're going to take a Nazarite vow, if you're going to be a Nazarite, then I don't want your flesh mastering you. I want you away from the flesh because I want the real you. I want to touch you.
And then we see they're also required to refrain from cutting their hair off their head during the entire period of the vow until the very end, when they would they would cut their hair and they would offer it as a sacrifice.
Yeah.
And we know that hair has always been a symbol of beauty and strength. So you're in this state of allowing your hair to grow and the beauty of it to grow. But at the end, you're offering that as your sacrifice to the Lord and giving it to Him to say that I'm offering every part of me, even what would be considered the beautiful and strength of me. I'm giving that to you, Lord.
And for those of us that would love to take a Nazarite vow right now and grow hair, we're not sure how much that would help.
The little shavings you take in for your offering.
Not sure my offering would be so grand at this moment, but whatever.
But we also have
Okay.
this
The last
prohibition to avoid contact with the dead. And this was always considered part of the priestly requirement. We've read it a couple of times in the Numbers. We saw it in Leviticus that you are not to be in contact with the dead. Again, symbolically representing that of the flesh, those things that are cause death to us. And spiritually we can see this, that part of our separation to God is we don't touch and intermingle with the things of the world.
Yeah.
We live in the world, but we are not of the world. And when we are touching and fellowshipping and being with the dead, hanging out in the graves, and not physical graves, but graveyard thinking, then we're going to become contaminated and unclean for God. So part of this vow, this separating, is avoiding this contact with the dead.
And let me say, of these three things, one of the things that we can kind of draw a parallel to is the priest, the Levites, the priest, would have in their part of their dress, they would have special head coverings. They were never allowed to touch the dead, and they didn't drink the wine, or they didn't drink to excess. They were not allowed to do that. And here is a non-priest. Any man, any woman of any tribe, non-priest, can take a vow for a season, a temporary period. It doesn't make them an official Levite, but it is as though they are being elevated through these rituals, through this commitment, this devotion, this set-apartness, to be at the level of being a priest. So there's a picture here where God is saying, look, I understand that I have named a tribe as my priest, but I'm not a respecter of persons. Anyone who wants to live in the holiness of being my priest and being in the closest place to me, here are some things you can do to show me that. Here are some things you can do to set yourself apart. And it really puts us all in the same place, which I think is a beautiful picture. So let's talk about a little bit for why God would say to take this vow. It's a devotion, right? It deals with disease that had been inflicted to people, prepares them for sacrifices. People would do it to ask for a blessing. They would do it to ask for a prayer to be answered. They would do it for special occasions. There's all kinds of reasons. The typical time frame a person took a Nazarite vow was usually 30 days. After 30 days, they would normally, there was no time frame prescribed.
Right.
You could have done it for a week, you could have done it for a month, 30 days, 60 days, 100 days, whatever. But 30 days kind of just became the traditional average time that people would do it. Now, an interesting note that I want to bring up here is the contrast between God's way for us to make set-apart rituals that draw us in versus man-made rituals. In the church world, there is a very big difference. The Church of Rome did the same thing. They called their priest to be separate. And yet they called him to be separate and make vows that were very different than the vow that God put in the Word. The church at the time forbid marriage. Not the Nazarite. The Nazarite could be married. The church permitted wine, but the Nazarite couldn't have wine.
Right.
The church vow lasted their entire life, but not the Nazarite. Their vow was temporary. In fact, the church would have the priest do the ceremonies and touch the dead and be the one who did all the rites of the dead. You would get last rites for the dead. And yet the Nazarite, no, you got to stay away from them. Don't touch the dead. What is interesting is how the man makes up vows that are different than God's, and it's like we're trying to improve on God's vows by creating our own. Now, on the other side of that coin, in ancient sage world, Maimonides, who is what do you call it? Middle centuries. What do you call
Middle
it?
Ages?
Middle Ages. Thank you. Middle centuries. The Middle Ages, so the 11th century. He's called the Rambam. Most modern Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, is based on many of Rashi and Rambam's writings. Rambam made this statement: our sages directed man to abstain only from those things which the Torah denies him, and not to forbid himself permitted things by vows or oaths. Thus, our sages rhetorically asked, are not the things which the Torah has prohibited sufficient for you? Why must you add further prohibitions? So Rambam makes this question, quoting the ancient sages, saying, The Torah has told us what we should restrict or not restrict. Why are we adding to that? And interestingly, Rambam then goes on to write document after document after document, adding to the restrictions and the ways of which you do things. And so there is this idea that even though we understand the Torah gives us what we need, we turn around and we write all kinds of our own vows, our own ways, our own thoughts, and we create our own system of religion. People say, I'm against organized religion. Well, I'm not. I believe God is organized and God has order. But I am against a religious system that is made up of only man's rules, ways, and regulations, and man's vows versus God's vows, God's ways. So it's a thing that we all can deal with. Sherry, tell us a little bit about Samson.
So we see part of our Haftorah this week is out of the book of Judges, and this is that beautiful story of Samson's life and how he comes into birth. His parents, his mom actually takes on a Nazarite vow.
Yeah.
She agrees not to drink wine, and then she says a razor will never come to his head, and he won't drink wine.
Yeah.
So actually, it's interesting that his mom put him under a Nazarite vow from birth, which if you've ever read the story of Samson and you don't understand the backdrop of this Nazarite vow, it doesn't make sense why Delilah can't cut his hair.
Yeah.
But what does he say? It's where my strength comes from, because I'm in relationship and covenant with God.
Yeah. And when she cuts it,
he loses his strength. He loses the anointing. He loses that connection that he had. So
now, he's not the only one that took a Nazarite vow. We see this was taken by Paul as well. He told that the Jews had believed he was teaching against the laws of Moses, and they wanted him to take a vow that showed he did not oppose the Torah, which is a very interesting idea here. He makes a choice. He could have obeyed any of the laws of the Torah to prove that he believed in the Torah, yet he chooses the Nazarite vow. This is what we would consider, honestly, in modern teaching, pretty obscure. That this is not, why would he, he could have obeyed anything, but this is the one he says, I want to show you something here. And I believe it's because Paul had a deep sense of passion to reach not only his people, but all people with the gospel, that he had made a choice on how he wanted to live. So we read in Acts chapter 21, this passage. It says, when they heard it, they glorified God, and they said to him, you see, brother, how many thousands there are among the Jews of those who have believed. So Paul is letting them know, hey, there's thousands of Jewish people who have come to faith in Messiah. They are zealous for the law. They've been told about you that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses. So this is the question. Paul, you're out there teaching these Gentiles and even the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake the Torah? Telling them not to circumcise their children or walk according to our customs. What then is to be done? They will certainly hear that you have come. Do therefore what we tell you. We have 4 men who are under a vow. Take these men, purify yourself along with them, pay their expenses so that they may shave their heads. Thus all will know that there is nothing in what they have been told about you, but that you yourselves also live in observance of the law. But as for the Gentiles who have believed, we have sent a letter with our judgment that they should abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, from blood, what has been strangled, from sexual immorality. So Paul took the men. The next day he purified himself along with them, went to the temple, giving notice when the days of purification would be fulfilled, and offering presented for each of them. So he takes the vow, and he says, I'm pure, I'll do this. I have no problem with it. This is a biblical thing to do. Why would I not do this? Of course I'll obey the Torah and take this.
And it's interesting, the expense. It is at the end of the vow, you're making offerings, and he's making the expense for 4 men and himself. So this is not a light thing he's done. He is literally putting his money where his mouth is.
Yeah, he is.
I follow God, I follow his ways, I follow his Torah, and I will show you that by my actions, by what I do.
And he uses the Nazarite vow for the next 3 chapters as kind of the piece of evidence. And I just want to kind of close with something he says here that's kind of a big deal to me for understanding Pauline writings. And it jumps off the pages from this Nazarite vow, if you will. It's in chapter 24 of the book of Acts. And it says this. It says, but this I do admit to you, starting in verse 14. This is Paul speaking, I worship the God of our fathers in accordance with the way, which they call a sect. So this is the group. Paul is identifying himself and saying, I am Jewish and I worship the God of Israel. I worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. This is Jacob. This is who I worship. But I do it in accordance with this sect you call the way. I continue to believe everything that accords with the Torah and everything written in the prophets. And I continue to have a hope in God, which they too accept, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the unrighteous. Indeed, it is because of this that I make the point of always having a clear conscience in both the sight of God, and of man. This is a beautiful picture here of Paul. He says, I'm following Yeshua. I believe in being born again. I follow this way. But clearly, like the Nazarite vow, I follow the Torah. I follow the prophets.
Right.
I follow the God of my fathers. These are not opposed. The God of Yeshua and being born again in Yeshua and the resurrection to come is not opposed to following God's Torah. Paul is saying, this is what I do. Therefore, this is what I teach. And I think it's a beautiful picture. So that gives us a little bit of this Nazarite vow that kind of set him apart, set him on a different level, and put him in line with many of the others from the Nazarite vow. Okay, that's the next part of chapter 6 actually deals with the Aaronic benediction. We're going to get that in another video. So let me just close up with chapter 7, which is very quick.
It's actually the longest chapter in the Torah.
Yeah.
There's 89 verses in chapter 7. It's one of the longest ones. And this is going through this meticulous counting of the offerings that are brought by each of the tribes. And as you read the Torah and you're reading how God speaks and Moses speaks, there's not a detail missed.
Yeah.
Each tribe, as a matter of fact, the pattern that they go through here is the offerings that they're bringing after Moses is finished setting up the tabernacle. They bring in, each of the tribes brings in a tribute, brings in an offering. Interestingly enough, the word that's used here, they're bringing a dedication offering. That word is Hanukkah. So they're bringing, which fast forward later, we'll see that when they rededicate the temple, they bring these. It's a Hanukkah that they're bringing a dedication, a gift they bring into the tabernacle, into the temple. Go ahead.
The first offering here is after Moses finished setting up the tabernacle. They bring oxen and carts, and that is a donation to the Levite tribes that are going to be carrying all this stuff around from place to place.
Right.
And then they take up a second offering, and that's where all the 12 tribes come over 12 days and just bring gift after gift after gift after gift.
Now, you'll notice starting in verse 18, it says, actually verse 12, and I'm going to read just this first one because then it's just a repeat, copy and paste with a new tribe, right? Bringing his offering on the first day was Nashon, the son of Amminadab, from the tribe of Judah. His offering was 1 silver plate weighing 130 shekels, 1 silver basin weighing 70 shekels by the shekel of the sanctuary, both of them filled with fine flour mixed with oil as of a grain offering. 1 ladle of 10 shekels of gold filled with incense, 1 young bull from the herd, 1 ram, 1 male lamb a year old as a burnt offering, 1 male goat as an sin offering, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 male goats, 5 male lambs, and a year old to be sacrificed as a fellowship offering. This was the offering of Nashon, son of Abinadab. Now, a couple things. 12 times you read that again. On the second day, the next tribe, the next tribe, the next tribe. Remember where they are. They are in the desert. They're a year and a half or so?
They're in the second year.
In the second year. They left Egypt.
Yeah.
Look at all this gold and silver that they have. Look at all these animals that they have. When we read that they plundered Egypt, and you think about the amount of gold and silver that was given to them by the Egyptians in that get out of here, or favor from many of them were neighbors they had. They were like, we're sending you with favor. This is an enormous amount of gold and silver that they have in this desert dwelling, nomadic group of people. And think about all these animals they're offering. think about the water supply necessary not only for the people but for the animals in the desert. I mean, you just begin to peel back and get the picture of the magnitude of the miracles of what God is doing for this people. We read it from our, air-conditioned, climate-controlled, go to the refrigerator, get what I want to eat, or the grocery store kind of mentality. But they're living in the elements in the desert, and they've got all these riches with them.
Now,
it's powerful.
It is incredibly powerful. Let me jump to, from these powerful riches they now have, let's think about the mentality.
Right.
What we're seeing here is a maturing process. Mm-hmm. The Israelites themselves were slaves. What do slaves have of a mentality? Number one, survive. How do you survive? Take whatever you can get and hold on to it. Survival is always about grabbing, and holding on to it. It's not about finding a way to go give. So they had slave mentality. They came out and they were always grabbing. And we even see in the first year, first few weeks as they're going to Sinai, they're constantly complaining and whining and wanting and needing more and wanting this and not happy about that. Why? Because they had a slave mentality. But we've seen now over a period of time, they're starting to gain maturity, and they're getting what we call a promised land mentality. They're going to become promised land dwellers. They're going to have permanent dwellings. And they're now getting the mentality, God is a miracle worker. God does miracles. He does support us. And so what are we going to do? We're going to give. We don't have to grab and hold and be greedy. We can give.
Yeah.
And this is an example where we see that giving nature of them. Now, they're going to fall back. We know the stories. They're going to fall back. They're going to have their idolatry, their sin. We're going to understand that. But this is a picture of what a promised land people look like versus a slave land people. Generous giving is happening. Finally, Moses, at the very end of this chapter, goes up to meet with God. The voice of God is actually heard speaking to him. And we would just say to all that are part of spiritual communities, our community included, the B1 community, that if your spiritual leaders do not hear the voice of God, they must take an assessment of where they are, and they must be challenged. Because the good spiritual communities, leaders are always meeting with God and hearing the voice of God. That is a pattern that is set from right here.
Yes.
So, until next time, when we're going to talk about other things, we're thankful that you've been with us, and we say God bless you and shalom.
Shalom.